So just recently, a small booktuber named Murphy Napier put out a video where she is talking about her desire to slow down her reading. And let's just say that I felt called out, not particularly by her, but I definitely saw myself in her on her video. I've definitely recognized myself and my own feelings I've had over the last while in regards to my reading speed. For those of you that are new to my channel, if you're clicking on this for the first time, I am known for reading a lot. I've recently put out a video, or a while back, talking about how I read over 300 books a year. So if you're interested more in the process of how I got to those high numbers, I'm going to link that video down below and in the cards. But essentially, today I want to talk about my own feelings about my reading speed, the things I like about it, the things that I don't, and I know the online judgments that follow. Often I hear these conversations online about these toxic booktubers that read so much and create all this competition and make everyone feel bad. But essentially, this is a video to address some of that and to come to terms with a question that I get a lot, or I hear a lot online, not necessarily directed at me, but talking about me. And it's always the question of, well, how do I read so much? And a lot of them ask, am I just faking it? The answer is no, of course not. But a lot of you are still not going to believe me. Regardless, I want to talk more about how I feel about my reading, so let's get into it. First, if you don't know me, I should start off by saying that I am an obsessive person when it comes to my hobbies. And when I say hobbies, I mean my hobby. And that is reading and creating content, which in my opinion has become one and the same. And so I do look at reading not just in terms of enjoyment about reading and experiencing books, but also does create content for my YouTube channel. So I'm very mindful of that. And I really encourage people who are not booktubers to treat their reading differently, because I know that if I was just a casual reader, I would make different choices when it comes to DNFing certain books, putting things aside, and how I spend my time. But I have an obsessive personality, and when I enjoy something, I really enjoy it, and I want to do that all the time. So without being too repetitive for my previous video, I will say that I carve out a lot of time for reading, and I have started to read more and more with each year that has passed. However, that is possibly changing. I'll talk about that soon. But essentially here, I want to address the fact that I read a lot, but I do so because I love it, because it brings me joy, it brings me happiness. It's how I deal with stress and anxiety. And if my husband feels like commenting on this video, he can attest to the fact that I carve out a lot of time for reading. If I don't have work or family obligations, if I have free time, I'm pretty much always reading. The only time I'm not reading is when I'm recording videos. And it's a vicious cycle, because the more I read, the more I want to film videos, and then the more I film videos, the more excited it gets me about reading. So I fully acknowledge that this is a habit or a personality trait that I have, good or bad. This is where I'm at. And there is nothing wrong if you feel differently. I realize that a lot of other people have other hobbies. Apparently people play video games or board games or see family or go out clubbing. I do some of this stuff, but I'll be honest, if you look at a pie chart of my hobbies, it's predominantly reading. Pretty much the only time that I engage in other hobbies is to have socialization. So when I'm actually visiting either with my husband or friends, I will go and play Dungeons and Dragons, I will watch a movie, but I don't do those activities solo. And instead, my solo time is reading. So to give a little bit of backstory, I should start by letting you all know, if you don't, that I am a mother. My son is now 4 years old, and my reading has basically spiraled along with my journey into motherhood. So first of all, when I was pregnant and found out that I was going to have a child, I believed that I would no longer have the ability to read again, and so I panic read as much as I could during my pregnancy. I wanted to read all the good books with the idea that I would never read again, because that is what all my mom friends said. They said, goodbye to your free time and self-interest. You will never again get to do anything fun. And so I believed them, I panicked, and I read a lot during my pregnancy. Then I had a young son, and it turns out that they don't sleep at night. They need bottles and feedings at night, and so you're stuck in the middle of the night with nothing to do. You can't go to sleep. Most people watch YouTube or movies or TV. I read. And so I started reading even more when I thought I'd be reading less. And so I got in the habit of reading hours and hours at night. And while my son is now 4 years old and I certainly don't spend as much time awake as I used to, I'll be honest, anyone who tells you that you start sleeping through the night after your kid turns 1 is lying to you. So I still actually do a fair amount of reading at night because I'm up and I'm awake, and that's what I do. From there, as my son has gotten older, my reading time has changed and evolved. And essentially, I always was in the mindset that reading time was scarce. And I'll be honest, for a while it was. For a long time, I didn't think I could continue this channel. I thought I would have to shut it down because I was finding it hard to find the time to read, let alone the silent time to film with a young, loud child in the house. And I was always in a panic. And so I read, and I do think that in a way my reading turned toxic during those periods because I was reading because I had to read at certain points of time. I never felt like I could allow myself to do other activities because if I didn't read then, there was no later. There was no other opportunity. I had to take every opportunity I had. So when my son napped, when he was out of the house, when I had a free lunch break, everything had to be focused on reading. And as you can imagine, as he's gotten older, that time has become less scarce. And I've kind of forgotten or not noticed as time has passed. So I found that I was still reading with the same scarcity mindset that got me through those sleepless nights, those short, crazy days. And now the fact is my son can happily play next to me. Sometimes we read together and I actually have more time than I think, but I'm still panic reading as if it's the last supper I'm ever going to get. And I'm really working now to change that. Another thing that has become toxic within my reading is something that I'm addressing this year, but especially in the last few years, I have gotten access to more review copies. And because I read a lot, I felt like I had to then request and read a lot of new releases because I had the time. However, by requesting and accepting books so readily, I ended up requesting a lot of books that turned out to be stinkers, or at least books that were not to my taste, books I didn't enjoy. I'm sure if you watched my wrap-ups over the last few years, you saw those videos where I was talking about books that I just wasn't very excited about. And while I will DNF very broadly when it comes to my own reading in terms of backlist titles, when I do request a book from a publisher, I do my very best to actually read and review it. So I found myself rushing through books to finish them simply because I wasn't enjoying them. I had a lot of books I requested from the publisher. I read the first page and thought, I don't want to read this. But because I felt I'd made an obligation, I continued on, pushed through the book, gave the book an okay review, but I didn't have a great time reading it. I didn't really find the story to be to my taste, and I was just rushing to get to the end. Again, I was reading the book. I read all the words, I read all the pieces of the book, but in terms of enjoyment, I should have skipped over it. I'm being much more careful this year in terms of saying no to review copies. I'm being much more careful what I say yes to, and I am noticing a difference there. And the last place that I have noticed that I do think my reading has turned toxic in the last few years, or specifically more so this year, is spending time reading during family time. Now, I've acknowledged before that I'm a big audiobook reader. If you have a problem with that, you'll probably dislike my channel because I do read in both physical and audio formats. But in the past, I had a young son who at the time was nonverbal. We would be going to the park, he'd be playing with his friends, and so I would be sitting at the side of the playground while he was off with his friends. No one was the wiser. He was fine. I got to read extra along the side. Now he's 4. He wants to talk. He wants to talk all the time. He never stops talking. And so I need to be more careful about putting away my headphones, closing that book. Again, I actually get lots of reading time. There's plenty of time in my day where he is fully immersed with his father, with a book, with something else, where he is out of the house, in a playgroup, etc. So I have no excuse to take away those precious moments with my young son to be reading. And this is something, again, that goes back to my obsessive personality. I always feel like I always need to be making the most out of every single moment. And I'm starting to realize that that's not ideal. Along the same line, especially with audiobooks, I was finding myself putting on an audiobook even if I only had a minute to listen. So for instance, if I was brushing my teeth, I would put on an audiobook for 30 seconds. And I realized that the time it took me to set up the audiobook to play, it was probably not worth the time I was even listening. And again, while I was hearing this story, it didn't make for the most cohesive experience. So again, as I move out of that scarcity mindset, I'm trying to work on quality reading time versus taking every single moment to read, because it kind of was starting to drive me nuts, if I'm honest. Now, while I acknowledge that there are toxic moments in my reading, I also want to acknowledge the flip side, and I want to point out some signs that I personally don't think that certain aspects of my reading are toxic right now. And the first one is the fact that reading makes me happy. When I am stressed, I read. When I'm anxious, I read. When I'm on vacation, when I'm just wanting to kick up my feet and have some fun, I open a book and I get legitimate enjoyment from it. So I think that if my reading had truly turned toxic, I wouldn't be enjoying those stories. And I'm really finding myself, especially right now, I'm being very mindful again about the books that I'm picking up and reading and reviewing. And if you look at my current or recent video content, I'm posting a lot of videos talking about books that I absolutely love. Last year, I was struggling a lot more. I was, again, reading a lot in terms of volume. I was consistently putting out review videos, but there was a lot of me telling you that a book was just okay, that it was fine, that it was good, that it was for someone else, and it wasn't very inspiring. I feel like I've honed in a lot better on what I want to read, and I'm reading that. And as long as I'm not forcing myself to read so much content that I don't legitimately enjoy, I'm finding myself very happy how I'm spending my time. I don't regret my reading time. I don't look back and say, oh, I wish I could have that hour back to do something else. I love reading, and that has not changed. And I know for a lot of booktubers, they reach burnout, they go into long reading slumps, and they feel frustrated and pressured because their channel requires them to film content based off the books they're reading and they're not reading. But I don't see that happening with me in the near future, knock on wood, but I really love my reading time. It's such a good place for me to do self-care and maintain my mental health, and so I can't see that changing anytime soon. So the other way that I'm gauging whether or not my reading has become toxic is the fact that I'm trying to do some exercises to slow my reading down and seeing the results. And based off of the results, I don't think that my reading speed has turned my reading experience toxic. So specifically, when it comes to physical books, I have tried actually slowing myself down when I'm reading something. I've mentioned that my speed has increased over the years, which I honestly think just comes down to practice. If you do something enough, you will get faster at it. I will promise you that. I was not a very fast reader when I started many years ago, so I just don't know how, quite frankly, to truly physically slow down my reading speed, because I feel like I can't read at all when I try to read that slowly. And the same thing goes for audiobooks. I know this is very contentious, but I do speed up audiobooks to a degree, and it's the fact that a lot of audiobook narrators purposely read at a very slow pace, and so for the slowest readers out there, they're able to comprehend it. But I find that to be very slow. It's much slower than the speed that we speak at, and so I find it irritating if it is so slow like that. So I've tried again slowing down audiobooks to the traditional 1.0 speed, and I cannot do it. I just feel like the person is talking so slowly, and my brain completely loses the thread of the plot. And so I do think that you have to read at a certain speed in order to keep that comprehension up. And maybe people will disagree, but that has been my personal experience, and I would love to know if other people have felt the same. So jumping off of that, you can see that I am identifying places that my reading has possibly gotten toxic, but places that it has not necessarily. Going back to Murphy's video, I do want to hone in on a point that she made, which I completely agree with. And when people talk about reading speed or reading so much, everyone assumes it is solely based off of the speed in which you can turn the pages and get to the end of the book. But really, when you talk to most voracious readers, myself included, and Murphy said the exact same thing, is that we spend hours a day reading. We choose to prioritize reading and make it part of our daily life, and not reading 10 minutes a day, not reading 30 minutes a day, but hours. And so if you want to read a lot, really it comes down to making time. And not everyone wants that. I'm repeating the same thing she did, but I mean it so firmly that if you enjoy movies and video games and other activities, that is perfectly okay, but it means that you won't read as much. I'm the kind of woman who is obsessively reading. I have one main hobby, and I get a lot of enjoyment from that. People do not know how I find so much time to read, but then they're also very confused in my comments when I haven't watched very popular movies. And it's simply a choice. I choose to do the hobby that gives you the most satisfaction. I watch some movies, but again, I watch them with my husband when we're doing something together. But for my solo time, I'm basically always reading. Can I say that enough? So I guess in conclusion, what I want to ask is, do you think my reading has become toxic? Do you think I need to slow it down? And what a lot of you may not realize is that I've actually already been doing this. And you might argue, if you watch my recent content, what are you talking about? You're reading just as much as ever. But it's simply just that I've gotten smarter about how I position my content. Sometimes I put up other videos, like recommendation videos, when I haven't read enough. And I'm also doing something where I'm reading a little bit less on the side. I actually read a lot that doesn't actually show up in my content, so I'm just kind of scaling back on those other books. But essentially, I'm reading what I want. I'm focusing on reading and reviewing books that I actually enjoy, and I think that's helped to cut out a lot of the angry rushing that I've done in the past of trying to push myself through books that I really didn't like. And if you do that often enough, it does kind of spoil the fun of reading. And the other place, which is something I think more of my family sees than you, is the fact that I was really noticing the fact I was taking reading time a little bit too far, and I need to set some proper boundaries about when I put away my cell phone, my headphones, when I put away a physical book, and fully give myself to my family and be fully present in those moments, because my kid's not getting any younger. But overall, I'd love to hear your opinions on this topic. Am I that toxic booktuber that we all hate and talk about, that constantly shames people or makes people feel bad for what they're reading or not reading? I really hope that's not the case, but do let me know if I ever give across those feelings or sentiments, because that's not my intention. And if I'm doing it, I want to know so I can change it. So I would love to know your opinions, thoughts down below, both a reflection of my reading habits as you see it from your perspective, as well as hearing your thoughts on your own reading speed. Do you wish you read faster? Are you happy with where you're at with your reading life? Because again, for me, I think it has far less to do with your reading speed, how many books you're consuming, but how much enjoyment you're getting out of the books you are reading. If you're reading 100 books a year, but you're only liking 10% of that, you're probably doing something wrong. If you're reading 5 books a year, but they are your all-time favorites and you constantly reread them, I think you're killing it. So that is my personal opinion there. So if you're new to my channel, I hope you do stick around. I do read a lot of horror, thriller, science fiction, fantasy, and true crime. And I would love to hear your comments and thoughts down below. And even if you just want to let me know you're here, you can drop a comment like an emoji, say a stack of books, and that helps me out too. And if you want to hit that little notification bell or give me a thumbs up, all that helps the mysterious YouTube algorithm. But if you'd like for me to do more of these personal videos, definitely let me know in the comments. And again, don't forget, if you want to hear more about how I read so fast, I will link my other video down below, although I will be honest that it's already becoming a little bit outdated because my reading habits have changed and again are continuing to change as I set more boundaries in my life. I'm no longer waking up to film videos at 6 a.m. Thank goodness, I do not miss that. So I'd love to hear all of your thoughts and opinions down below. What is the ideal reading speed? Am I doing it right? Am I getting toxic? Am I the booktuber we all hate? Let me know down below in the comments, and also let me know, did you actually think I was faking it? Did you think I was literally faking reading books? Because that's a whole nother level of booktube evil. So let me know in the comments. I'll talk to you there. Thanks for watching. Okay, bye-bye.